This is what's left of La Lima, a northern Honduran town of 100,000 before the onslaught of Mitch. Today, most of it remains submerged. Thousands who were able to make it to safe ground have set up makeshift shelters like these. Rosa Marina Cruz is one of the many still trickling in, dazed, with nothing but the muddy clothes on her back. We lost everything, absolutely everything, she says. Clothes, beds, we've been totally destroyed. The magnitude of the disaster is impossible to measure. This is Chiquita banana territory, and according to the Chamber of Commerce, the entire crop has been lost, and with it the livelihood of tens of thousands of destitute residents of La Lima. These bananas, which were able to be salvaged from the crop, are all many people have had to eat. International aid has finally begun pouring in. This US C-130 brought in desperately needed water. But distributing it all to the most hard-hit areas, which have been cut off, is the main obstacle. Areas like Curaren, a small community of 2,000 in southern Honduras. This was the first time in 9 days that people here received anything to eat or drink, or for that matter, had any contact with the outside world. Pleas for help are repeated everywhere. We don't have enough antibiotics, medicine for diarrhea, plasma. We need everything, says this doctor. Thousands are dead, tens of thousands still missing. But with resources stretched so thin, the main priority now is to attend to the survivors. People like Elisa Morales Rosado. Her only home now, the mattress she and her daughter are sleeping on. The water reached our waist. We put the children on our shoulders so they would be safe. There was no time to save anything else, she says. But like everyone else here, Elisa Morales considers herself blessed. Blessed to be alive. Lucia Newman, CNN, Tegucigalpa, Honduras. In Comayagüela, as in so many parts of Honduras, people struggle to salvage whatever they can of their possessions in neighborhoods that no longer exist. This mother of 6 who lost everything is looking for food, but too weary now to keep walking. I left the other 4 children behind, she says, and I could only take the small ones with me to see if I can find some help. The desperation is everywhere. What you can't see is the stench of death, which is nearly unbearable here. The precarious sanitary conditions in Honduras right now are raising the serious danger of diseases, of an outbreak of epidemics, such as cholera. As the waters recede, more and more victims are being found. There's no longer room in the morgue for so many bodies. So those whose relatives can't even afford a simple wooden casket are being buried in mass graves. In the capital, people line up from 5 in the morning for water. Water which is contaminated because both sewerage and drinking water pipes are broken. Another major sanitary nightmare.
Estamos rodeados de suciedad, de lodo, de agua contaminada.
We're surrounded by mud, waste, and contaminated water. Although authorities are doing what they can, this is going to cause epidemics, says the president of Honduras's Red Cross. The capital, meanwhile, remains cut off. This big trench severs the city's critical lifeline to the north. While workers labored round the clock to repair the road, nearby, hundreds of people formed a human chain to bring to the city the first supplies of produce, like these onions. It's taken us 5 days to get here, says this man. And it's not just supplies that have been cut off since Mitch hit Honduras nearly 2 weeks ago, but people too. This old woman who'd been stranded in the capital braved the treacherous path across the ravine to reach her town. I'm going home, she says. A home that she isn't even sure she'll find once she gets there. Lucia Newman, CNN, Comayagüela, Honduras. Starting all over again. For these people, a drama perhaps even more daunting than Hurricane Mitch itself. There are days I want to cry from sorrow, says this woman, because I don't know how to go on. I don't know what to do in the situation we're in. Before, they had very little. Now, they have nothing. At least 1 million Hondurans are homeless, penniless, living hand-to-mouth in precarious refugee centers like this one. The country has been so devastated by Mitch that it's difficult to know even where to begin picking up the pieces. The nation's main bridges and roads are damaged or destroyed. Drinking water and food are in critical short supply, where available at all. Entire banana plantations are destroyed. Sugar refineries are submerged.
Zero would be like how we were. This is worse because we have 75% almost of our major infrastructure either destroyed, damaged, or torn apart. Our agriculture is in shambles. All of our crops, our major crops, our export products, which this is an agricultural country, it's gone.
In the capital, motorists line up for hours hoping to get gasoline, which is being rationed. So are staple foods such as rice, beans, milk, and fresh meat, which aren't reaching the city. Rebuilding Honduras, which even before the disaster was one of the poorest countries in the hemisphere, is an overwhelming task.
This is something that happens once in a century. I think this is the gravest disaster that has occurred here in I would say in America in this century. But this is the only country we have, so we have to pick it up, and we will.
The help of the international community, says the president, will be crucial, not just to meet the immediate emergency, but to generate desperately needed jobs to rebuild the country. The hope is that once the media attention dies down, Honduras won't be forgotten. Lucia Newman, CNN, Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Members of a Canadian fire brigade join their Honduran counterparts in the painstaking search for bodies. Here in La Esperanza, a shantytown in the capital, at least 20 people were buried alive in a landslide caused by Hurricane Mitch. My son is buried down there, says Mario Ruben Mazariega. My wife's body was found Monday, but my son, he's still there. Neighbors stood by anxiously, waiting to see who would be found next. While the firemen labored to find more bodies, helicopters ferried relief supplies from the nearby military airport. From Mexico, tons of flour to make what the country's famous for, tortillas. from the United States, milk and canned food. From everywhere, drinking water, blankets, and medicine. International relief is finally pouring in from all over the world, but getting it out to the most needy and remote areas is still the main challenge. Areas that haven't received anything to eat or drink since the hurricane hit Honduras more than 2 weeks ago. At the airport, supplies are transferred to smaller planes that can reach remote towns that have been isolated by washed-out roads and bridges. But even right here in the capital, there are still many areas that haven't received anything. Families like this one living outdoors under a tin roof. Others wash their clothes in what they know is water dangerously contaminated by dead animals and people. We need water. We don't have any, so we have no choice but to wash here, even if we don't want to, says this resident. Back on the slope, just above the river, the firemen finally find what they're searching for. It's a boy, between the age of 10 and 12. His body now too decomposed to be identified immediately. Lucia Newman, CNN, Comayagüela, Honduras. More than 2 weeks after the onslaught of Hurricane Mitch, the remote hamlet of San Ramon in southern Honduras receives its very first emergency aid. To these peasants who say they've lived on nothing but water for the last 10 days, the arrival of the Mexican Air Force chopper bearing rice, beans, and cornmeal is seen as a true miracle. Thank God and all of you who've come to save us, exclaims Andrea Paz. But saving Honduras from the worst natural disaster to hit the region in 2 centuries will require more than rice and beans.
How are we going to generate soon enough jobs for these people?
How are you going to?
And we don't want anything to be given to us. We just want the opportunity to build the country back again.
Honduras is asking for its foreign debt to be forgiven. This as tens of thousands of Honduran workers go into debt. The banana companies, the nation's main employer, have dismissed most of the workforce because of crop damage. And while some will receive the equivalent of $38 a month, it's only a loan.
Un llamado de clamor.
I'm making an appeal, says this man who lost everything he had. We're dying of hunger. All I want is to work in exchange for food. The soil of Honduras has been so depleted because of floodwaters that replanting crops for food and exports will require massive amounts of fertilizer. The Honduran government is also looking for international help in the reconstruction of bridges and roads, most of which were damaged or destroyed by the hurricane. Helping Honduras isn't just a humanitarian issue, but also one of enlightened self-interest from many countries in the region, especially the United States. As many point out, unless Hondurans can survive at home, the crisis could trigger a flood of illegal immigration. The irony is that all this happened at a time when at last Central America had rid itself of dictatorships and civil wars and was getting on its feet. Now, what they have most in common is tragedy. Lucia Newman, CNN, Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Riley Wooten, a fireman who's been recovering the bodies of the victims of Hurricane Mitch all week, wades into this house following reports that a corpse floated in and is trapped inside. A particularly difficult entry because this was his house.
Keep going, keep pulling. You got it.
Wooten finds no one, but does recover something of strong sentimental value.
One of my mother's flowers.
Wooten was lucky. At least all his relatives in the house survived.
The house was built by my grandmother in 1929, and my mother grew up here. I grew up here. What can I tell you? It's hard.
It's difficult for everyone hit by the hurricane, but especially those who are losing hope of ever finding their missing loved ones, as the task becomes more difficult.
It's very hard, especially when you have the surviving members there, you know, begging us to get their family out. And it's impossible, as you can see. I mean, the street, if you see the water level there, that water level is probably 4 feet right now.
No one knows how many people are buried under all this mud and rubble. Still, people work round the clock in what seems like an eternal cleanup effort. Students, soldiers, everyone strong enough is pitching in. There's a sense of a race against time as the stench in this once prosperous commercial neighborhood builds. The sanitary emergency, the health hazards are growing by the day, and the problem is not just physical. People who've lost their homes, their jobs, are feeling the psychological impact. We have headaches, our brain hurts, because more than anything we feel traumatized, says this woman who's waiting to see the doctor. Here at Comayagüela's semi-destroyed marketplace, a team of Cuban doctors has set up an emergency clinic to attend to patients, many of whom are suffering from hypertension caused by stress. They've lived through very difficult times, says the doctor, and their life will continue to be very difficult because of the hurricane. There's no consolation. No one can tell people here when life might even approach normality. Lucia Newman, CNN, Comayagüela, Honduras. This was not only the first time desperately needed relief arrived in the central Honduran town of El Lloro. It was also one of the first times such large quantities of supplies were delivered anywhere. The American Chinooks, heavy lift helicopters, are making it easier to get aid out to isolated areas.
They're using a lot of civilian helicopters, contracting out or whatever, so they can get up here with a little. They just can't deliver a fraction of what we can deliver in one load.
Villagers lost no time helping unload the 27,000 pounds of sugar, milk, rice, and beans. More than 2 weeks after Mitch hit Honduras, helicopters are still the only way to get food, water, and medicine to many parts of the country. That's why restoring damaged or destroyed bridges and roads is a major priority. Roads like this one in El Volcán, where an American military engineering battalion is opening up this rural highway, which was completely buried under mudslides. The U.S. Navy Seabees are the first American engineering unit to begin the arduous task of reconnecting Honduras by land.
And this part of the road was completely impassable about 6 hours ago.
Now these villagers who were stranded by the hurricane are finally able to walk the road back to their homes. Great repair job, beams this man. There were no cars coming in any direction, says this woman. We suffered. We had no food. At the nearby Sotocano Joint U.S.-Honduran Air Base, Tipper Gore arrived to get a first-hand look at the devastation left by Hurricane Mitch.
We know that this tragedy is of biblical proportion. We know that they need aid of all kinds.
The U.S. Vice President's wife not only wanted to witness the plight of the Honduran people, but also to lend a symbolic helping hand. From shovels to the arrival of heavy road building equipment, which arrived this week, the international support for Honduras is being felt. And for these people who've now got their road back, it's making all the difference. Lucia Newman, CNN, El Volcán, Honduras. Patients Patients fill the hallways of Honduras's largest hospital. A hospital where there's no longer running water, where sanitary conditions are so appalling that all but the most urgent surgeries have been cancelled.
The
lack of water means that we've had to have water tanks outside, and everyone from doctors to nurses and patients' relatives have had to get their own water in plastic bags to clean the patients.
In the capital, the absence of clean water caused by the rupture of pipelines during the hurricane has become the single worst problem. A sanitary nightmare. Desperate residents bathe and wash clothes in rivers contaminated by corpses and chemicals from a factory upstream which was destroyed in the storm. Skin infections abound as a result. I have fungus on my feet and skin irritations from walking in so much contamination, says this woman who's waiting to see the doctor. Worse yet is the lack of clean drinking water.
Our biggest concern is that the consumption of our water can lead to epidemics, especially of cholera.
Marta Perez sobs in the hospital corridor, the water crisis she believes indirectly responsible for her 9-year-old daughter's death. Little Jennifer had been helping her mother wash clothes at a makeshift well up the street. Witnesses say an emotionally unstable construction worker wanted to cover it up, arguing it got in the way of his work. My sister told the man just a little bit more water, and when she was lifting the pail up, the man pulled out a gun and grabbed her head and shot her through the head, says Jennifer's brother. The water crisis is also responsible for the increase in hemorrhagic dengue fever, which is endangering the lives of victims like this little boy. Doctors say that the incubation period for some of the worst diseases, such as cholera, dengue fever, and gastroenteritis, is several weeks. That's why they say that the worst is yet to come. Lucia Newman, CNN, Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
Holding her pet dog close to her chest, Ellen sits with her friend Lilian and mourns. They cry for this young man, 22-year-old Jose Augusto, who killed himself last Saturday by swallowing pesticide. A street kid, he had saved 2 little girls from the floods that ravaged Tegucigalpa. But then he found out his whole family had been lost to the river.
The little girls can't sleep nor eat. All they do is ask for him.
They are some of the thousands of nameless victims of Hurricane Mitch, children whose world, the streets of Tegucigalpa, was destroyed during the flooding.
The authorities fear there are still hundreds of bodies in the river, among them those of dozens of street children who used to make this bridge their home and who were sleeping under it the night the river rose.
15-year-old Carlos will never forget that night. He is still looking for one of his friends who disappeared.
We've looked here, on the boulevard, at the stadium, and we just can't find him.
Bruce Harris helps run a shelter for street children in Tegucigalpa. He fears the worst for dozens of children that have come missing. He says there is no way of knowing their fate.
The street kids never had a home. They never had anyone to care about them, so they're not on anybody's lists, so they're being forgotten.
Those that survived and have been found have been moved into a temporary shelter in a public school. Meanwhile, bulldozers and excavators continue digging through the mud, looking for what may be hundreds of bodies. And those children whose last refuge had been the streets wonder where they might go now. Harris Whitbeck, CNN, Tegucigalpa, Honduras. A bundle of clothes, a beat-up chest of drawers, and a television set is all that is left of Berta Andrade's house.
When we were young, my husband and I worked very hard to build our house. Back then I was strong, but now I'm sick, and I don't know if I will be able to start over.
But the task of starting over is what she and tens of thousands of Hondurans now have to face. And mental health workers are concerned that a general state of depression, including in some cases post-traumatic stress syndrome, is setting in among the survivors of Hurricane Mitch.
If we don't start treating these people immediately, the reconstruction effort will be all the more difficult.
In shelters in Tegucigalpa, psychology students supervised by professionals are counseling survivors.
It's our time to practice what we've learned, and it's our time to do something for our country.
The work with children is considered especially important. They may not show it, but some of these kids have witnessed more tragedy than many adults see in a lifetime. But psychologists say victims of post-traumatic stress syndrome can get back to normal fairly quickly with the right treatment.
Sometimes something as simple as a teddy bear. Studies have shown that giving stuffed animals to people who have suffered severe trauma can reduce the incidence of recurring nightmares and other stress-related illnesses by up to 50%.
That's why organizations like Casa Alianza, a shelter for street children, are planning on giving toys to children who have lost it all. It is a priority that at first glance doesn't seem important, but that may help prevent nightmares long after the immediate emergency is over. Harris Whitbeck, CNN, Tegucigalpa. It's an arduous, day-long journey made out of desperation. But for this group of men and women from the fishing village of Santa Rosa, it is the only way to get food and clothing to their devastated town. Every day they make a 100-kilometer or 60-mile round trip to an airfield where U.S. Air Force cargo planes deliver tens of thousands of pounds of donated food. The supplies are desperately needed. Coastal towns like Santa Rosa were completely cut off by Hurricane Mitch and virtually wiped out.
Everything you can see underwater was houses. There were 16 families living there.
But the food these communities need, some haven't received any aid in 10 days, is frustratingly out of their reach. Once the aid arrives at the airport in nearby Trujillo, it sits on the tarmac for days. Frustrated relief workers say the government claims it lacks the resources to get to the hardest hit communities.
A lot of the problem is transportation and the lack of gasoline, the lack of enough helicopters to get things out of here.
Tons of donated pineapples sit in containers rotting in the sun. Honduran army soldiers guard sacks of rice and beans, cans of powdered milk, and boxes of clothing, or release it to the mayors of nearby, more accessible towns. So the villagers of Santa Rosa decided to take matters into their own hands. They walk for hours, ply rivers in dugout canoes, and battle knee-deep rivers of mud in hardy pickup trucks to get the aid they need. Some missionary groups use their own vehicles to help villagers get supplies.
The food and the building materials that we get immediately go to a warehouse here in Trujillo, and from there they're distributed to central locations and even into the most remote areas of the country.
They see the problem of food distribution not only as an immediate emergency, but also as a long-term threat.
I think the biggest problem right now is infrastructure. Because these people aren't able to have the buses and the transportation that they're used to, it's very difficult to get them the food. In addition, without electricity, without gas in the area right now, Production is at a standstill. A lot of people have been fired. What was left of the economy here is pretty much gone.
But the resilience of the villagers of places like Santa Rosa is not gone, and they are using it to pick up where the airplanes left off. Harris Whitbeck, CNN, Tegucigalpa, Honduras.